If it's Thursday, it's the end of an era for Democrats, as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announces she will step aside, passing the torch to a new generation of House Democrats after nearly 20 years as the party's top leader in Congress. This as Republicans narrowly clinch control of the House, signaling plans for investigations into the Biden administration and setting the stage for a new era of divided government, even as the Republican Party is divided amongst itself. Plus, the House holds an historic hearing on the Cherokee Nation's centuries-old demand for a delegate in Congress, why it matters, and what it means for the fight for representation, with the Cherokee Nation's delegate-designate herself. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake, in for Chuck Todd on an historic day on Capitol Hill. Just hours after Republicans officially hit the 218-seat threshold to capture a House majority in January, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi took to the floor to announce her intention to step down as House Democratic leader after nearly 2 decades in charge of the caucus. With her colleagues looking on, she made it official, capping off one of the most enduring leadership tenures in modern political history.
When I first came to the floor at 6 years old, never would I have thought that someday I would go from homemaker to House Speaker. No matter what title you all, my colleagues, have bestowed upon me, Speaker, Leader, Whip, there is no greater official honor for me than to stand on this floor and to speak for the people of San Francisco. This I will continue to do as a member of the House, speaking for the people of San Francisco, serving the great state of California, and defending our Constitution. And with great confidence in our caucus, I will not seek re-election to Democratic leadership in the next Congress. For me, the hour's come for a new generation to lead the Democratic caucus that I so deeply respect. And I'm grateful that so many are ready and willing to shoulder this awesome responsibility.
After nearly 20 years running the House Democratic caucus, it's hard to find a modern parallel for Pelosi's tenure in House leadership. She's the first woman to hold the gavel as Speaker of the House, and she did that twice. She was instrumental in every Democratic law passed in the Biden and Obama administrations, from the Great Recession stimulus to Obamacare to the American Rescue Plan. She was the top Democrat in Washington during the Trump administration, and her House Democratic caucus impeached him twice. She also wielded immense power within the Democratic caucus, keeping the caucus together through ideological fracturing and passing trillion-dollar pieces of President Biden's agenda with a narrow majority. Pelosi spoke emotionally today about her career in public service and about her husband, Paul, who's recovering after being violently attacked by someone who was targeting the Speaker. Amid an environment of heightened political turmoil, Pelosi addressed the fragility of our American democracy.
In this House, we begin each day with a prayer and a pledge to the flag. And every day, I am in awe of the majestic miracle that is American democracy. As we participate in a hallmark of our republic, the peaceful, orderly transition from one Congress to the next, let us consider the words of, again, President Lincoln, spoken during one of America's darkest hours. He called upon us to come together, to swell the chorus of the Union, when once again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. That, again, is the task at hand. A new day is dawning on the horizon, and I look forward, always forward, to the unfolding story of our nation, a story of light and love, of patriotism and progress, of many becoming one.
Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn also announced that they're stepping aside from their top leadership posts, opening the door for a new generation of younger Democratic leaders. All indications are that those new leaders will be Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and Pete Aguilar. This changing of the guard comes as Democrats had a better-than-expected performance in last week's midterm. House Republicans, meanwhile, they're poised to keep their leadership team largely unchanged, despite a disappointing midterms that left them just narrowly taking control of the House. We should also note that Kevin McCarthy was not present at Pelosi's speech this afternoon. In fact, the only member of the House Republican leadership team to attend was Whip Steve Scalise. Some top House Republicans held a press conference today previewing their plans for oversight investigations into Hunter Biden and members of the Biden family, the beginning of what are likely to be many investigations in the new Congress targeting the current administration. Joining me now to talk about all of it on Capitol Hill is NBC's Ryan Nobles, and NBC's Monica Alba is outside the White House. So, Ryan, what's the mood been like there today? Historic day, the reaction to Speaker Pelosi's speech.
You know, Garrett, I think probably the best word you could use to describe what we saw here today was grateful. So many members of the Democratic caucus seem grateful for the work that Nancy Pelosi has given to this body over the past 3 decades, 20 in leadership, but also grateful by the way that she has decided to pass the baton on to the next generation. I mean, you know as well as anyone that there was quite a bit of angst behind the scenes as to how this was all going to play out. Was she going to stay or was she going to go? And she found kind of a happy medium here where she's going to allow for this new generation of Democratic leaders to step forward while at the same time preserving those tight margins between Republicans and Democrats in the House of Representatives. And the other kind of pretty big feat here was the fact that she took that step and she got these other two very prominent and powerful leaders in Steny Hoyer and James Clyburn to take that step with her. And this is what Steny Hoyer had to say about that decision by the three of them to let the next crop of leaders take the baton.
Because I think it's time for new leadership, and I think we have excellent opportunities. Very frankly, I think I could be elected, and that was not the issue. But I think it's time. I think it's always good for a party to have new blood and new invigoration, enthusiasm, and new ideas.
So I think one of the things that was interesting there, what you heard from Leader Hoyer, Garrett, is that he made it clear that he could have been elected if he wanted to. But he's stepping down on his own accord, which I think is important. They do want to make it clear that if they want to stay in these positions, they could. And the other thing that's important to point out, Garrett, is that under normal circumstances, all three of these individuals would have just resigned Congress and left. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're still going to be here gives them the opportunity to kind of steward this next group of leaders into the next generation of Congress.
Right. It's just like you and I could have totally played college ball, but, we wanted to focus on our studies.
Exactly.
Exactly. Talk a little bit about this new presumptive incoming leadership team. I think people have gotten to know Hakeem Jeffries a little bit. People might know Pete Aguilar from the January 6th committee. What does this new team bring to the table?
Well, first of all, shout out to Generation X, right? It's our time. It's this is the first crop of Generation X leaders to really kind of take control. These are guys in their mid to late 40s, early 50s that are going to be the people in charge, and they are all dynamic personalities. They are people who have been in Congress for some time, but also really have the support and loyalty amongst their membership. And the three of them all work together as well. There's no doubt that they're each their own individual members of Congress. They have their own kind of individual goals, and they're certainly not running as a ticket by any stretch of the imagination, but they do seem to be in concert in terms of what they think the direction of the Democratic caucus should be going forward. And make no mistake, there's going to be a lot that they're going to have to be involved in this next Congress, especially because Republicans do not have a huge majority, maybe somewhere between 5 and 7 seats. There's going to be opportunities for Democrats to make noise when it comes to legislation and the check on the oversight that Republicans are going to try and put forward. So them staying unified is going to be very, very important, and these three are going to be the ones in charge of it.
And Ryan, what about the role that, Congresswoman Pelosi will play going forward? We haven't seen something like this in quite a long time.
Yeah, and I do think it's going to take some time to figure out exactly what role she will play. This is a kind of new territory for her, and it's new territory for the other members of Congress. And I'm sure there's going to be a careful balancing act between her advising the next round of leadership and not bowling over them. I think there's still a lot of members of Congress that still see her as their guiding light and may be willing to look to her before they look to this new crop of leaders. So it's really going to be incumbent upon her and Steny Hoyer and James Clyburn to say, no. This is a decision for this group. We're here if you need the help, but they are the leaders now, and we are their support.
As we keep on this theme of generational change, I'll turn to my fellow millennial at the White House, Monica Alba. Monica, what's the reaction been like from the president? We know that he asked the speaker to stay on, or at least that he wanted her to. How did he find out, and what does the White House feel about this decision?
Well, we know the two have had a close relationship for years, Garrett, and they spoke this morning before Speaker Pelosi made this news public, and the president congratulated her on her years of service, her storied career, and essentially put out a statement saying the nicest things possible about another human being, saying that when he thinks of Nancy Pelosi, he thinks of dignity and that she will go down in history as one of the greatest and most effective speakers of all time. So we're talking here about ages and generations. President Biden is about to celebrate his 80th birthday on Sunday. So I do think it's a fascinating conversation and question in terms of what the two talked about when you look at the president's own future. And he has said he's going to go for it and run for re-election again in 2024. At least he intends to. But those are going to be the big conversations coming up. I think that is the dynamic that this White House is keenly aware of. The fact that on Capitol Hill, they're passing the torch to a new generation when you have a soon-to-be octogenarian president who's saying, I may stick around here and try to do this all over again. The thing that White House officials tell me is that when they look at what happened here with the midterms, defying expectations, better than expected performance, they feel like it's because they were running on President Biden's agenda and some of those legislative accomplishments. So, of course, now we're looking at gridlocked Washington, which is nothing new to a veteran of Capitol Hill, no. Former Senator Joe Biden. But it is a just really, really interesting conversation here now as they plot his future and has all those conversations over the holidays coming up.
And Mon, what about the relationship between Biden and Hakeem Jeffries? Here you've got he's replacing someone who was kind of a generational peer, someone who very united in how they think about their Catholic faith, with the younger man with a different background. How's that working relationship going to be with potentially the new top Democrat in the House?
And this is a White House that has said we are going to support whatever House Democrats want to do here. We're going to let them take the lead. We're going to work with them every step of the way. So it's a good working relationship. But of course, as you know, Garrett, the president also had really good relationships with Steny Hoyer, with Jim Clyburn, with Nancy Pelosi. So all of those relationships continue. The fact that she's going to be the sort of Speaker Emeritus leading from the backbench, I think you can kind of know that the president's going to be in touch with Hoyer and Clyburn as well as the new leaders, again, saying we're here to help. And the other thing we all know and can talk about is that Republicans are going to have all these investigations, talk of impeachment. So they got to stick close on the strategy as that oversight heats up, even though this White House has been bracing for that for months, if not more than a year, knowing that's the likely outcome here.
Right. Let's not forget, President Biden probably wouldn't be President Biden if it weren't for Jim Clyburn. So we'll put a bookmark in there. Ryan and Monica, thank you both. And joining me now is Vermont Democratic Congressman and one of the House Democrats' chief deputy whips, Peter Welch, but he's also Senator-elect Peter Welch. You served with Nancy Pelosi since 2007. What was your reaction to seeing her step back in this way today?
Well, your reporter used the word grateful. It was really an astonishing experience to serve with her. She had a level of physical energy that is renowned, but what she had also was incredible emotional energy, and she had a capacity to listen. And I think what was the glue that held the Democrats together, from the Blue Dogs to the Progressives, was they always knew she would listen. She would do her best to accommodate their concerns. And at the end of the day, when you have to get to 218 and all of us have to settle for what we can get, you felt you'd had a fair hearing from the Speaker. So that emotional capacity that she had, as well as her renowned physical strength and strategic sense, all added up to her being the greatest speaker in the history of the country.
Democrats, I think, it sometimes took for granted her ability to keep that caucus united. Do Hakeem Jeffries and the new team realize the scope of the challenge they're going to have in the minority, trying to keep that ideologically diverse group together?
Well, they do. I mean, they were huge supporters of Nancy Pelosi. And I think had Nancy decided to run again, they would have been supportive of her. But they know very much how skillful she was. And frankly, I think they learned from it. You know, Nancy Pelosi was tough, but her persuasive skills were not based on being tough or my way or the highway. It was through listening. It was through accommodating. It was through trying to get people to see how we could have some common ground and make some real progress. And she did the litany of the accomplishments through the three presidents, minus one, that she worked with. So I think that our new leaders, the likely new leaders, go in with a kind of appreciation for the skills and how the way Nancy Pelosi conducted herself is a good model. But they're going to have to find their own way, and they will.
The rest of my questions are for Senator-elect Welch. So you represent the new blood in the Senate in this class. You're one of very few freshmen coming in on the Democratic side, just you and John Fetterman. What do you think about this idea of, the importance of bringing new blood into either of these bodies in a Democratic caucus broadly across both chambers that has been perhaps less willing to have turnover and power changing hands with younger members?
Well, as Steny Hoyer said, new blood is always good, and experience is always good. And what I think is really important for us in the Senate is we have an opportunity to get things done. I mean, this election, especially in the Senate, but with our narrow loss in the House, the American people stood up for democracy. That's number one. And number two, the American people stood up for having a government that does practical things that make a difference in their lives. And this is, I think, the opportunity that I'm excited about in the Senate, because I think we have Republicans and Democrats who want to get things done.
Well, in the Senate the last 2 years, we saw what amounted to a kind of a stunning outbreak of bipartisanship. When you think about all the things that did get done in the Senate on a bipartisan basis, that was obviously not the case in the House. I wonder how you think about, working in the Senate now with a Republican-controlled House. Do you think there are opportunities for real bipartisanship? What kind of legislation might actually make it to President Biden's desk, given the breakdown of the two chambers?
Well, when look at what we did last year. The things we did that are bipartisan are things that needed to be done for you, whether you voted for Trump or you voted for Biden. We all need broadband. We all have veterans who suffered and got cancer as a result of burn pits, and they need VA benefits. We all need lower-cost prescription drugs. So we can be bipartisan if what the underlying policy is about trying to help folks in my district and in my Republican colleagues' district. What the existential question is for the Republican House colleagues is, do they want to focus on legislation or investigations, impeachment, and fighting the last war?
What do you think about that? I mean, you've obviously worked in some capacity with Kevin McCarthy and with a lot of these House Republicans for a long time. Do you think they want to pass legislation? Do you think they want to make law? Or do you think they want to pave the way for, a Republican majority in both chambers and a President Trump or whomever else in 2024?
Well, they're clearly split. I mean, the Leader McCarthy got a big vote within the caucus, but over 30 Freedom Caucus folks who are prepared to burn the House down. So this is an act in progress. What's going to happen? And you saw the rollout today with an announcement of all the investigations they want to run. And it feels to me a little bit tone deaf, because we've got inflation, we've got affordability issues, and we have communities that want the government to be a partner with state government and local governments to try to get things done. And the focus on all these investigations that are looking in the rearview mirror, I don't think will help them. But that's the existential question for the Republicans. Senator Schumer's made it very clear that we want to work with Republicans in the Senate.
Last question for you. Since you're going to be the new kid at school when you show up at the Senate, what are you expecting to seem most different after your long career in the House moving across the hall?
Well, it's smaller,
Significantly.
as you know. The question I have is, I'm going to miss my House colleagues. But the fact is, I think I have a real opportunity to stay engaged with my House colleagues. And the hope is that through that bipartisan and bicameral approach, I can help make progress in the Senate.
We shall see. Senator-elect Peter Welch, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
And coming up, more on the future of both parties as Democrats begin a new era under new leadership, while Republicans face growing divisions with the same leadership. And a programming note, I'm here because this afternoon, Chuck is sitting down with former Vice President Mike Pence. You can see the first piece of that interview right here on Meet the Press Now tomorrow, with the full interview airing Sunday on Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. You are watching Meet the Press Now. Stick around. Welcome back. As we've been discussing, after nearly 2 decades as the leader of House Democrats, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is now stepping aside. Pelosi was first elected to Congress in the late 1980s, and she made her first appearance on Meet the Press back in 1994. In 2006, a year before she made history as the first female speaker, she discussed the possibility with Tim Russert. Take a listen.
You're going to be the speaker.
Well, if that's the case, I just want a Democratic speaker.
But in 2004, you predicted you would be the speaker. It didn't happen.
I thought John Kerry was going to be president
You
of the United States.
guaranteed that?
That I guarantee.
Can you guarantee you'll be the Speaker?
No, I can say that. I can say what I said then. If the election were held today, we would have a Democratic majority. And on that very first day, we will have a new direction for America, for all Americans, not the privileged few. We're going to make America safer by passing the Homeland Security recommendations immediately. Give America a raise by increasing the minimum wage. Make health care affordable by negotiating for better prices. Lower the cost of college education by cutting in half the interest on student loans. We're going to be fair.
To celebrate 75 years of Meet the Press, we've created a special interactive site with more clips and highlights from our archives. You can scan the QR code on your screen to take a deep dive into the past. There's some fascinating stuff in there. But for more now on the future of Congress and of both political parties, I'm joined by Lisa Desjardins, correspondent for PBS NewsHour, Navin Nayak, president and executive director of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Republican strategist Brad Todd. So, Navin, what did the Pelosi era really mean for Democrats? She spanned multiple presidents. She was sort of like the glue that got this done over the past 20 years. It's hard to imagine, I think, for many Democrats turning the page on that era.
It really is. It was fairly emotional. She actually marks my time in Washington doing this kind of work. And you think of the accomplishments. I mean, I think that's what she wants to be remembered for. And they're pretty historic, whether it's on health care, what she's done now with infrastructure, student loan. There's a whole set of accomplishments. Climate change at the top of that list. We'll be talking about her for a long time. But it really is. I think she's going to age even better than she's been worn, in the sense that I don't think we're going to have a speaker like her who is so committed to actually getting things done and so able to rally her caucus to actually get these kinds of accomplishments.
Lisa, we've covered these three, potential incoming new leaders for a while. I don't know if you heard my question to Peter Welch, but to me, it's like, I wonder if they really know what they're getting themselves into. Yeah. I mean, to step into the spotlight in this way, what do you expect to see from this new leadership team?
It's almost like marrying into the royal family. Like, you have no idea, really, right. Until you're doing it, how crazy it is. I think this is an untested group. They certainly have been in dress rehearsals as you speak, doing press conferences regularly. Hakeem Jeffries was part of an impeachment team, those kinds of things. They're untested, so we really don't know what we're going to get. I expect them to make some mistakes, but I also think that's a big part of why now Speaker Pelosi will become Representative Pelosi. She's going to stay there to sort of add some heft and some backbone as they continue.
Brad, what does it say to you that the party that outperformed expectations, has their leaders stepping back, and the party that underperformed is keeping their leadership team around, the Republicans in both the House and the Senate largely keeping leadership teams in place that I think most Republicans acknowledged did not give them the results that they were hoping for this time around?
Well, it wasn't as good as we wanted, but Democrats did lose seats each of the last two elections in the House, and it is time for generational change on the Democratic side. And I think that without having a full Democratic control, the president's agenda is not going to move very much in the House, and so the need for a seasoned veteran speaker is much less than it would be if you're trying to move the president's agenda. And while it's divided government, it's probably a good time for the Democrats to break in new leaders. And I think for Republicans, it's a good time for us to figure out how to be a majority again. And we have to oppose the president's policies, and we have to come up with those of our own. One of the lessons we learned last week was that I think Republicans in Congress did not put forth a proactive agenda that independents could rally around.
That's the Rick Scott argument to a degree. But Republicans lost something here, too. Nancy Pelosi has been the chief boogeyman for Republicans for most of those last 20 years. Joe Biden doesn't generate the same hate that Speaker Pelosi does. How do Republicans react to that in the next election cycle and as kind of they go forward?
Well, Nancy Pelosi couched herself as a partisan warrior, right? She tried to take over Congress for the Democrats from the Republicans. She's a liberal from San Francisco, the most liberal city in the country. So in many ways, she welcomed that caricature that became very convenient in most campaigns. And she was also a very partisan speaker. She's a successful speaker, but she was a partisan. You don't find Nancy Pelosi accomplishments that are bipartisan accomplishments.
No, not typically.
And so, therefore, the attacks on Nancy Pelosi in campaigns were true. Voters did see her as a partisan, and they did see her as a symbol of Democratic control of government. I don't think that was inaccurate. I don't know who's going to be the next symbol of that for Republicans. Chuck Schumer might be a candidate.
Navin, all this talk about generational change in leadership, I kind of wonder how that is being heard down the street. the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. How should Democrats think about this moment of generational change, and how should the White House embrace this moment or not? I mean, President Biden set himself up to be this bridge between generations. He talked about it during the campaign, but now he's the octogenarian kind of staying behind here while all this other group of leaders moves on.
I guess a little bit to Brad's point, I actually think if, how different would this moment have been if Democrats had picked up 5 more seats? Mm-hmm. Would there have been more of a call for Speaker Pelosi to stick around to keep implementing Biden's agenda? And to that extent, President Biden has just presided over the most successful midterm election for a president in maybe, at least 50 years in a first term. And I think we'll get credit for the unbelievable agenda he passed in his first 2 years. So I don't know why there'd be a ton of pressure given the actual success he's been enjoying, both legislatively and politically.
I would say George Bush's midterm was better.
Except the difference here, George Bush, we had 9/11. He was at 70% approval rating.
He did gain seats and was more popular. I mean, Biden lost Congress. So,
I think the problem we have here is both parties are getting the same message from voters, but they're just looking at the message each other's getting. We know that the Democratic initial agenda from President Biden was too to the left for voters and for the votes in the House and Senate. And now Republicans are getting the message, you guys are too extreme, too.
To that end, I want to play Mitch McConnell's prognosis here from the press conference, which I think you were at the other day, and we'll talk about it on the other side. Here was McConnell's take on this question of how the voters were viewing these midterms.
We underperformed among voters who did not like President Biden's performance among independents and among moderate Republicans who looked at us and concluded too much chaos, too much negativity, and we turned off a lot of these centrist voters.
So how do they get these centrist voters back?
Yeah, especially with a House that has really just been waiting to do investigations and really speak to their base. I think it's going to be difficult. And I think we may see what I see for those centrist voters that I was talking to, including some of my own family, more motivation to stay home. And that is going to be the trick. It's not so much moving a Democrat to Republican or the vice versa. It's getting those voters who are just exhausted and fed up to show up again. And I don't hear anything from either party, or especially from Republicans, from Mitch McConnell yesterday, saying how they're going to do that.
So, Brad, Kevin McCarthy either has a different read or just a different set of circumstances to deal with here, right? We have House Republicans going out today saying they want to investigate Hunter Biden. That's going to be one of their first orders of business. That doesn't seem to fit Mitch McConnell's prescription. So I wonder, which do you think it is here? Does McCarthy have a different theory of the case, or just a different set of problems he has to solve as leader of a House Republican conference?
Well, first, I take a little bit of issue with Senator McConnell's point, because we did have examples of independents and moderate Republicans voting for Republicans. It was for Republican governors. Ron DeSantis, Mike DeWine, Brian Kemp, Henry McMaster. The story just goes down the line.
But every Democratic governor, save one, got reelected.
But in those swing states, those large swing states where Republican governors had a strong, positive, conservative agenda to run on, they were elected. In Washington, where the whole story was stop Joe Biden and Democrats, we got a stalemate. And so it's incumbent upon Republican leaders in Congress to put forward that agenda and to take some chances with that agenda so that independents realize they have a better alternative.
I think this is actually the challenge for Republicans. There's really just two proposals on the table. One is actually run on their agenda, which there was an agenda. Remember, the conversation at the end of the year was a Republican agenda to have a national ban on abortion, to either privatize or end social security.
Not embraced by all the leadership.
But that was the conversation.
You can't say that. There was not a national ban on abortion. It was a national ban on late-term abortion. Get it right. Get your facts right.
Late term, unless you can't do your math.
I'll be glad to put that on the ballot.
The majority of House Republicans in the caucus support a complete ban on abortion. The majority of House Republicans in the caucus completely.
Every Democrat in the House voted for abortion all the way to the due date, which is the least popular.
There is the agenda.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell's not saying we need a different agenda. He's saying we need to be quiet about it. So he's saying we shouldn't be talking about our agenda until we get elected, and then we'll implement it.
So what does Joe Biden do about his agenda now? What does Joe Biden still have on his to-do list that can get through a Congress in this configuration?
I actually think that's going to be, to a large extent, up to Kevin McCarthy. I mean, if there's one story of the last 2 years, it has actually been one of the most successful periods of bipartisan legislation, right? We had the CHIPS and Science Act, we had the infrastructure bill, we had gun safety. I mean, I can't think of a time in my 20 years where there's been that level of, and Joe Biden gets a lot of credit for that because he is actually willing to engage with Republicans. I think Kevin McCarthy, the opportunity is there for Kevin McCarthy. I'm not sure where they're going to find common ground, but we've seen nothing from Republicans. Kevin McCarthy has basically said that Marjorie Taylor Greene has as much influence in that caucus, which she's not going to work with Joe Biden.
I think Republicans have had majority of the House for exactly how many hours? So I think we're still waiting to see them roll out their agenda. That's fair. But there are some Republicans and Democrats who talk to each other. Kevin McCarthy, friends with Gerson, who's an important Democrat in the Senate. So there are opportunities. I don't know if anyone's going to take them.
Lisa, I would give you the last word here in the minute or so I've got left here. But I mean, if there's two guys in Washington who know how to get along with people who they don't like, it's probably Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy. Is there an opportunity for a personal relationship here that could make a difference in Washington?
I think there is an opportunity, but their politics are so different. Because Kevin McCarthy, right? Kevin McCarthy has really just cared about his base. He's got the Freedom Caucus. Very different kind of politician than I think Joe Biden, even though on a personal level, sure, I think they could get along.
Not a lot of room for McCarthy to move, at least in the next 7 weeks, but we'll see what happens on the other side.
Maybe not after.
Maybe not after either. All right, we got to leave it there. Navin, Brad, Lisa, thank you all. And up next, President Zelensky clashes with President Biden and NATO allies over what caused that deadly blast inside Poland, as Russian airstrikes wreak havoc on Ukraine's energy supply with winter fast approaching. We're live in Kyiv next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. In a rare display of public disagreement, President Zelensky has broken with U.S. and NATO officials about what caused an explosion that killed 2 people inside Polish territory earlier this week. Polish, U.S., and NATO officials have stated that the blast was likely caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile. But Zelensky said in a statement today that the world does not know what happened and that it was impossible to talk about specifics. Overnight, President Biden had this to say when he returned to the White House.
What's your reaction to President Zelensky saying that the missiles that landed in Poland were not Ukrainian?
That's not the evidence.
Meanwhile, Polish President Duda visited the blast site today and said that Ukrainian officials can come see the ongoing investigation, but he wouldn't elaborate on whether Poland would grant Ukraine access to participating in the investigation. NBC's foreign correspondent Molly Hunter is on the ground in Kyiv for us tonight. So, Molly, nobody would blame Zelensky or Ukraine if this was a Ukrainian, defense missile that got knocked astray here. But he's still standing by this statement that we don't know if it was a Ukrainian missile. Do we have any idea why he's kind of dug in on this point? And how worried is he or are Ukrainian officials about potentially creating a rift with the West over this issue?
Yeah, Garrett, this is a conflict that Ukraine does not want to have right now. We do actually have an update on one of the points that you just made about the Polish investigators cooperating with Ukrainian investigators. We did just hear from the Ukrainian foreign minister that there are now Ukrainian investigators on the ground. They expect to get access to that crash site, which is something Zelensky has been talking about all day, about a joint investigation. But clearly, I think President Zelensky is looking for an off-ramp. His rhetoric and his language has certainly ratcheted down since Tuesday. So on Tuesday, he came out very quickly before any investigation, before the Polish president, before NATO, and said this was a Russian missile. Yesterday afternoon, Garrett, he was very strong again. This was not our missile. This was not our missile strike. And now the language he is using is subtly softer, climbing back slightly. So he is saying, look, we should wait for the investigation. We want to be part of this investigation. We do know from Secretary of State Blinken that obviously and understandably he has spoken with Polish President Duda about the specifics. So I do think this is not something that he wants to be at loggerheads with his NATO and Western allies. So I think we will start to see that language soften in the next 24 hours, especially once Ukrainian investigators get access to that site.
Another day of bombardment today across Ukraine, more Russian strikes. What did you see and hear in Kyiv, and what more do we know about the other cities that were struck today?
Yeah, exactly. Another major day. Of course, Tuesday was the biggest aerial bombardment that this country has seen since the beginning of the war. Today, according to Ukrainian officials, 16 more cruise missiles, including 5 to 5 drones. We were actually driving from the Polish-Ukrainian border where we were to Kyiv when the sirens went off. Countrywide alert. According to Kyiv officials, Garrett, there were no actual impacts in the Kyiv area. That means air defense. The air defenses were working, though people here did report hearing explosions. The difference of today, there were definitely fewer missiles than we saw 2 days ago, but they were highly strategically targeting infrastructure, critical infrastructure, knocking out additional power plants and power stations. And according to the state energy company, today's strikes were very damaging, and it's going to take even more time for those repairs to kick in.
Molly, we're almost out of time, but I have to ask you one more question. I understand it snowed for the first time in Kyiv today, and the way I'm thinking about this is this. If this is the start of winter in this war, Whose side is winter on in this war? Is it going to hurt the Ukrainian population? Is it going to hurt the Russian invasion?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about the military, I think any Ukrainian official is going to say, look, the Ukrainian military is ready and they know how to fight in the winter. This is their home turf. They are digging in for a seriously strong fight in the winter. If you're talking about Ukrainian civilians, I'm looking at a capital city right now that half the population is without power. Garrett, 10 million households. That's not people. That is households. A lot more people across this country are without power. Most people, according to the Ukrainian energy company, are looking at 2 to 3 hours because of emergency rolling blackouts. So these critical infrastructure targets that Russia is hitting, that is hurting and targeting the civilian population.
All right, Molly Hunter, thank you for your reporting. Stay warm and stay safe. I want to turn now to some sad news here in Washington. Michael Gerson, speechwriter for George W. Bush and a Washington Post columnist, has died from complications from cancer, according to the Washington Post. Gerson helped craft some of President Bush's major addresses, including his first inaugural address and his speech at the National Cathedral following the 9/11 attacks. President Bush released a statement writing, quote, "Mike harnessed the power of the pen to not just write about good policy, but drive it." Gerson was a frequent guest on both the Sunday and the daily versions of Meet the Press, bringing his insight as a former White House senior advisor and providing thoughtful insight into the Republican Party. Michael Gerson was 58 years old.
Move boldly into the future, grounded by the principles that have propelled us this far and open to fresh possibilities for the future. A new day is dawning on the horizon, and I look forward, always forward, to the unfolding story of our nation.
And welcome back. I'm joined now by Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan, who co-chairs the House Policy and Communications Committee. And Congresswoman, I guess the big question that we've been talking about this whole hour, what does the future of the Democratic Party look like now without Nancy Pelosi at the helm in Congress?
So, first of all, Nancy's still going to be here as a member whose wisdom and counsel is going to be listened to by many, and no one should underestimate just what wisdom she can bring to things. We'll see now things are beginning to shake out. I think it is very likely that Hakeem Jeffries will be running for minority leader and Catherine Clark is whip. I think there are a lot of conversations going out. People are making their phone calls, and we're going to have a very strong, diverse leadership that is going to be a team with the wisdom of those that have gone before them, because we will benefit from having both Speaker Pelosi, but Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn as part of that group that's going to be helping to guide us as we work hard to take the majority back in 2024.
Speaker Pelosi was always kind of the master of herding cats when the different ideological factions of the Democratic Party were getting crosswise with each other. I wonder, do you see the kind of ideological center of the party drifting in one direction or another, or kind of changing with Pelosi, again, not at the kind of at the helm with that tight grip on where the party was going?
So the thing that Nancy Pelosi did well was to understand all of the different factions inside of our caucus, the different dynamics. I think that this new group of people, the new likely leaders, very much understand that we are a diverse caucus in many different ways, geographically, gender, 1,000 different issues. New Dems, CPC, and they're going to understand. I think everybody in the caucus has a responsibility to understand that we have got to pull together, listen to each other, and develop strategy that takes everybody's perspective into place. The good news is that Nancy Pelosi has made it clear that she wants to stay here and help during this transition, and I think we got good, smart people. They're going to be running for these senior leadership jobs, where we're going to have the benefit of someone who's not going to be afraid to kick someone in the ass if they think they need to be listening to somebody.
We could say that on streaming. Congresswoman, you talk about the diversity of the caucus and of this new leadership team, but I see Hakeem Jeffries from New York, Pete Aguilar from California, Catherine Clark from Massachusetts. From a Michigander to a Texan, what about the vast middle of the country where Democrats have sometimes struggled to reach people?
So let me be very clear. I am a candidate for vice chair of the caucus, and you just gave my #1 reason for running, because it is middle America where races are won or lost. We showed you in Michigan that when you pull together and you listen to everybody, you can. We won up and down the ticket. And I will be running for vice chair with the hopes that we will have somebody from middle America who has to understand that there are a lot of working men and women, union workers who are worried about their future, and that we have to listen to them. But we have done very well in the last few years, bringing the environmentalists, the unions, and even the OEMs, the car manufacturers, for those together on issues. So it will be important that that voice is heard in leadership.
Michigan was kind of the Democrats' Florida in this midterm. It was the state that shone the brightest for the party in this midterm. What did you learn in Michigan that the rest of the country needs to figure out from a Democratic Party perspective?
That we understood that there were different perspectives and that you brought everybody to the table, that you went into that union hall and talked to the union worker that's worried about their job, that is concerned about inflation, increased gasoline prices. I think there were three things on the ballot in Michigan. Inflation was one, but choice was clearly another. People that had values, people that believed a woman had a right to make her own medical decisions. And three, democracy was very clearly on the ballot by the time Election Day came.
And speaking of Michigan, you're working on an effort to try to move Michigan up in the nominating process for president. I'm looking at a letter in which you write, Michigan is one of the best places to pick a president. Key groups that Democrats need to persuade and turn out to win in national elections are the backbone of our state. Michigan is the most diverse battleground state and a microcosm of America. Iowa did not acquit itself particularly well in the last election cycle. How confident are you that Michigan is going to move up, maybe substantially, in the nominating process for the next president of the United States?
I think Michigan remains a purple state. Nobody can take it for granted. I'm working very hard on this issue as the DNC, the Rules Committee, meets again next week. I think we need a state where all the candidates can be seen by the diversity of what you just talked to, from urban areas to rural areas, manufacturing, union households. And I think we've made a very good case. I think we are definitively made it to the second round, and talking to a lot of people, we are very much in the mix, and it is my intention for the next 10 days to keep making that case hard, because we will determine. And by the way, it's good for Republicans too. It's a good place to have a presidential primary because it does reflect the diversity of this country. And you go to states that don't have what all the issues are in the general election, you don't get the strongest candidates.
I think it's a compelling argument, Congresswoman. We'll see what the rest of the party thinks. Thank you very much for making time today.
Thank you.
We've got an update now on another Democrat, another former House Democrat, changing jobs into the future here. NBC News is projecting that Congresswoman Karen Bass has been elected mayor of Los Angeles, defeating billionaire real estate developer Rick Caruso. Bass will become the first woman ever to serve as mayor of the country's second largest city. In a speech just a few hours ago, the mayor-elect reaffirmed her commitment to solve homelessness, respond to crime, and make Los Angeles more affordable for working families. Up next, the growing political power of Native American voters and the latest on the Cherokee Nation's centuries-old fight for a seat in Congress. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. It's been an historic day in Washington as the new Congress begins to take shape. And when the House is seated in January, it may include one more history maker. Yesterday, the House Rules Committee took the first step in upholding a treaty promise to the Cherokee Nation that has sat unfulfilled for nearly 200 years, holding a hearing on seating a Cherokee Nation delegate in Congress. A Cherokee delegate was part of an 1835 treaty that forced thousands of Cherokee to vacate their lands, sending them on to what would later be known as the Trail of Tears. In exchange, the tribe was promised representation in Congress. And yesterday, Cherokee Nation Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin asked the U.S. government to finally make good on that promise.
Cherokee Nation has, in fact, adhered to our obligations under these treaties. I'm here to ask the United States to do the same. It's time for this body to honor this promise and seat our delegate in the House of Representatives.
I'm joined now by Cherokee Nation Delegate-designate Kim Teehee. So, Kim, what can you tell us about yesterday's hearing, the process going forward to get you seated as a delegate in Congress?
Well, first of all, the House Rules Committee held a historic hearing over our treaty right. It's never been done before. And what impressed me was how well-informed the members were, how thoughtful they were. But Also, and more importantly, the comments that they made were made on a bipartisan basis, and they were supportive. And so we're ready to move forward to the next steps, which we believe is a vote. We've asked for a vote to happen. We hope it will happen.
And my understanding is this would be an agreement that would come up almost for renewal every 2 years, especially given the nation's history negotiating with the United States. Mm-hmm. Are you comfortable that that's an agreement you can get behind? Do you trust Congress to renew a delegate seat every 2 years?
I have to. I mean, the treaty right was ratified by the Senate, signed by the President of the United States. It is the supreme law of the land. Only the House needs to act at this point, and we'll put it to the test.
I want to talk about the historical significance of this potentially, but also the political significance of it. Historically speaking, how important is the idea of seating a Cherokee delegate to counteracting the whitewashing of this part of American history?
It is critically important. First of all, it gives Cherokee Nation a seat at the table when formulating laws that impact us, but impact other tribes too. It gives us an opportunity, a unique opportunity, to educate members about tribes in this country, about ways in which we need to adequately address the great needs of Indian country. I also think it would send a strong message that the United States keeps its word by honoring the treaties, and would give some measure of justice for those who lost their lives on that forced march.
Members of Cherokee Nation live and work in states and cities just like anybody else. They have representation in Congress currently, wherever their local representation might be. What does a Cherokee Nation delegate bring to the table that their pre-existing member of Congress doesn't?
Well, first of all, Cherokee Nation's representative would be a delegate. Right? And that's the difference. The other difference is, as a citizen of the nation who lives in northeastern Oklahoma, I'm in CD2. That's Mark Wayne Mullen's seat, at least for now.
For now, yeah.
And I vote for him. He will still have to answer to those who elected him in that position. My position is to represent the governmental interest of the nation. I was appointed and confirmed by the body of people who are elected to their positions. And so that's what I will have foremost on my mind.
Should a delegate position like that, if you're going to be seated in Congress, be elected directly by the people of Cherokee Nation, like Chuck Hoskin is elected to be principal chief?
Well, our leaders and the people of the Cherokee Nation, when they ratified the Constitution of the Cherokee Nation, chose to put in that Constitution the authority for the principal chief to appoint a delegate and for the council to confirm that delegate. So they chose that the elected leaders of the nation should select their delegate.
So if you're seated in this next Congress, what committees do you want to be on? What issues would you focus on? I mean, help me and our viewers understand what may be the blind spots that a Cherokee Nation delegate could address that, your regular member of Congress wouldn't or might not be as interested in.
Right. Well, first of all, Indian tribes have too few champions that exist on Capitol Hill. And so joining that small group of people, I think, would be helpful. Absolutely, trying to get the resources that are necessary to address healthcare, education, infrastructure, but also uniquely addressing who we are culturally as a people and honoring the uniqueness about us, which, for example, our language, making sure that we continue to have the resources and the tools necessary to continue to revitalize, protect, and preserve our native languages.
The Cherokee Nation isn't the only nation that has similar treaty arrangements. You guys have made more progress on pushing Congress than have some of these other tribes. Do you believe that, A, these other tribal delegates should also be seated simultaneously or in the near future? And if not, would you consider part of your role as representing the interests of these tribes more broadly, given their lack of representation, too, for many of the same issues that have bedeviled the Cherokee Nation?
Right. Well, certainly yesterday at the hearing, there was mention of a couple of other treaties that are out there. And I think the examination of those treaty rights should not delay Cherokee Nation's efforts to get the delegates seated. Certainly across Indian country, Indian tribes all over from the west to the east have signaled their support for Cherokee Nation's delegate, and we hope to get that done.
Do you feel like, broadly speaking, the tide is turning culturally on recognition of Native American issues? I think there's so many prominent Native Americans in this government right now. Sharice Davis, Mary Patolo is going to win in Alaska. You have Secretary of Interior for the first time who's a Native. Do you feel like the tide has turned on this after so many years of whitewashing? I mean, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely. The stars are completely aligned. You just listed some of the many things where we finally have representation at the highest level of government. And we also have 3 women who are federal judges. I mean, that's in the most diverse Congress in my lifetime, the most women in Congress in my lifetime. So I hope to join them, next year.
What's the time frame for finding out whether or not that will happen? Does it need to be voted on in the lame duck? Is that your understanding?
That's our hope. We're trying to get it done this year.
All right, Kim Teehee, we will leave it there. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate you.
And thank you for being with us this hour. That's going to do it for me. Chuck will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And remember, he'll have the first sound from his interview with former Vice President Mike Pence ahead of the full interview on Meet the Press Sunday. News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.